back for another episode of the Capes and Tights podcast right here on capesandtights.com. I'm your host, Justin Soderberg. This episode, we're welcoming author Jay Bonansinga to the podcast to discuss his 8 Walking Dead novels. He co-wrote the first 4 with Robert Kirkman, co-creator of The Walking Dead, and the last 4 with the permission of co-creator Robert Kirkman of The Walking Dead, with his own story that was derived from the original 4, and so on and so on. Jay Bonansinga is also the author of The Black Mariah, Lucid, Self-Storage, as well as Stan Lee's The Devil's Quintet, The Armageddon Game, and The Shadow Society, which comes out May 9th of 2023. But we talked to The Walking Dead, we talked to The Walking Dead universe, his books, the comics, the TV show, Stan Lee's The Devil's Quintet, and so much more on this episode. So enjoy listening to it. But before you do, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. 5-star reviews would be welcome. Thank you very much, everybody, for the support you've already given us. This is episode 93, featuring Jay Bonansinga of the Walking Dead novel series. He mostly co-wrote with Robert Kirkman of The Walking Dead. Enjoy, everyone. Welcome, Jay. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great. I'm happy to be here.
I'm glad to be here. I feel like I'm late to the boat. I mentioned before we started recording that I kind of stumbled upon your Walking Dead books in the middle of it. And it was pretty sad that I didn't have that. I said, trying to put some guests together on the podcast, looking forward. And I'm like, you know what? I really want to talk to Jay about these books. So I said, we're a little late to get game about these books because they obviously stopped. Your last one came out in 2017. However, we will touch on some of the stuff that you're working on currently. I do have some of that on my little notes here too. Cool. But I think The Walking Dead is a big fan. I'm a big fan of The Walking Dead. So I'm guessing you are too, because you wrote some of the books.
I mean, I have this fantasy. This is apropos of nothing really, but I have this fantasy that, after I'm long gone, and my books are out there, in yard sales, like you were saying, but my fantasy is like, maybe this, I don't know how this sounds, but like somewhere in some little cabin in some mountainous resort town, somebody's on vacation and they stumble upon a little bookshelf, and they pull out one of my books and they go, oh, this looks interesting, and they sit on a Chase lounge with a doobie and a cocktail, and they just get carried away by one of my books. And I'm, I think maybe it's every author's dream that they live on, after they die. I just don't want to come back as a zombie. That's the only thing. That's my only request from the universe.
Well, see, so it's like I said, you're an author, obviously, of many novels, but the Walking Dead series seems to have at least shine light on I speaking on personal opinion here, a personal life story, is that I learned about your books through the Walking Dead novel series you did with the first 4 with Robert Kirkman himself. He co-wrote them with you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then the last 4 you did on your own, obviously with his approval. But did you just quickly on that sense, did you have to send him stuff for him to read before you were allowed to publish it, or someone else, or how did that work for the last 4?
Well, that's a great question, because Robert and Skybound, his company, which essentially owns the Walking Dead intellectual property, they were sort of, they played the role of a publisher, even though we had a publisher, Thomas Dunn Books, a great publisher, and a great editor there named Brendan Deneen. And so Brendan did the traditional work of an editor at a major publishing house. He would go through and do the line edit, but Robert Kirkman was the big gorilla in the room always. I mean, he was a great guy. And I remember when we first started working, he's like, why don't you send me a chunk, like 50 pages, and I'll see how you're doing. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I sent him a first chunk of 50 pages. This is on the very first book, Rise of the Governor, which is actually probably one of the best books I ever wrote. I'm so proud of that one. It won awards. Everybody refers to it. David Morrissey, the guy that played the governor in the TV series, used it as his, Bible to create his character. It was just the greatest experience. So I sent him a 50-page chunk, and he's like, his only comment is, yeah, you have on page 17 that this guy's got a tattoo, and there's no tattoo on this guy in the comic, and he goes, he's shirtless in one panel, and there's no tattoo. And I'm like, okay, what else?
Easy edit.
Because that's it. I'm like, that's it? Yeah, that's it. Why don't you send me 100-page chunks? So then I send him a 100-page chunk after that. And he reads that and he just goes, why don't you just finish the book and then send me the whole thing? And I could tell, he liked what I was doing. And we hit the ground running like that. We wrote 8 books like that, and like you said, the first 4, he would give me like maybe a 10, 12-page outline. That was it. And it was very similar to his comic book scripts. Because I got a lot of his comic book scripts just, for research and stuff. And that's how he wrote comic books. He was very informal, almost like a film director. Yeah. And he would say, you guys, let's start out with a splash page of Michonne. It would be like, we did on issue number 39, but now she's dressed up, like a pirate. And I'm sure you guys will come up with something great. That's how he would give me notes on, the plots of the books that he wanted me to write. After a while, after 4 books, he trusted me to just come up with the stories. He said the thing about the final 4 books I wrote 8 books in 7 years, but he said, I think, the only thing I ask in this next set of 4 books is that you write about Woodbury. That's my only request, he said, because I think the fans are going to wonder what happened in Woodbury after they moved on, after the main group of characters moved on. What happened in Woodbury? And so that was probably the most amazing time of my career, because what I was coming up with was canon, and so I would come up with new characters. He and his editors would not look at it till it was done, and it was just such a great working relationship, and I said to Robert Kirkman one time, like, you have this reputation for being, difficult, like, the subtitle under that says Dick.
Yes.
and I said, I find that you're like a pussycat. You're like easygoing and everything. And he goes, well, I would be a dick if you weren't doing you weren't doing something that I liked. You would find that I would be a dick. So, he's a very cool guy. But he's the master of that domain, man. He every time that they would lose a showrunner on the series, I would go, don't worry, there's really only one big showrunner in the sky. It's Robert Kirkman, and it's his baby, and he knows where it's going. And
that's amazing. I love how you said the script thing, because in the back of the Walking Dead Deluxe, they're reissuing all of the Walking Dead comic books in this format, the Walking Dead Deluxe. I have all the issues 27, which is the first appearance of the governor, which I also have the first one. But like this, the cool thing they did in the back of these things were these cutting room floor things. It's hard for people who are listening, not watching, but it's basically this page of notes on, it says like Rick wants to follow them in panel 1 and so on and so forth. So it's kind of funny how he just basically wrote more Pat notice, and then panel 14 more, or page 14 more Pat notice, and then page 15 more Pat notice.
right That's how, it was fascinating to read his scripts, because they were sort of straight from his brain into the panel. The artist knew how to just like go boom, exactly what he's asking for, but a lot of times it was very intuitive and everything. That's what I've found over the years. It's like the great artists of our time are intuitive. They just follow their gut. They don't care what, you know, the zeitgeist says, or what anybody says. They just follow their gut. And you know, Kirkman had his gut. He was a born storyteller. He is a born storyteller, I think. You know, he always knows when, to me, this is my own interpretation. He always knows when, you know, a fan, a reader, you know, a viewer has become bored with a certain storyline, you know, because every time you can go through the hundreds of comics, and every time it's, you know, we're getting a little used to Negan. We're getting used to him. You know, we could use, you know, you turn the page and the zombies are talking to each other. And you're like, wait, what? You know, and it's perfect. It's just, it grabs the reader. They and that's the final cliffhanger of an issue.
Yeah.
Boom, you're into the next, you know, it was just a fascinating. I've worked with some greats. I worked with George Romero, and these are my mentors, man. I learned so much from these people. But Kirkman taught me so much just about storytelling.
So how did that relationship end up? So obviously in 2006, Walking Dead number 27 comes out. It's the first appearance of the governor. And then 2011 is when The Rise of the Governor is published.
Wow.
It's 5 years. Like how did the relationship, how did this start? How did you start getting connected with Robert Kirkman and making a book about the governor in Woodbury?
I mean, I get asked that a lot, and I have over the years been asked that, and I always wish, you know, I wish I had a more charming, funny inside sports, you know, show business story, because it really was two agents having lunch.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's the beginning of a joke, but that's exactly how I got hooked up with Robert Kirkman, because, you know, DA David Albert was, you know, his manager and agent and, you know, right-hand man, and he was having a drink with my agent Andy Cohen, and DA just said, we're looking for a horror writer. And, you know, I'm proudly, you know, a horror writer. I mean, that's my, basically that's what I'm known for. You know, I've written all kinds of books, nonfiction, thrillers, police procedurals, and stuff like that. But I'm known for, that's how I started out. You know, my first book was a Stoker finalist, and you know, George Romero signed up to direct the movie version of it. You know, I figured my career would be all downhill from there, because that's my first book, you know. So, you know, Kirkman was looking for a horror writer, and Andy Cohen told his manager, well, I actually represent one. His name's Jay Bonansinga, you know, and they sent them my stuff. And there were like 4 other authors in the ring vying for that job. And the more I learned about it, the more I wanted it. You know, it was like, you know, dating Princess Di. You know, you know, you heard, you know, Frank Darabont's gonna be the showrunner. It's gonna be an AMC, and you're, wait, a zombie apocalypse on AMC? This is gonna be amazing, you know. And I just kept learning more and more stuff about it. And finally, I just told Andy, tell him that I have George Romero's phone number on, you know, my speed dial. Just tell him, you know, I know George. I've worked with him. He's a friend of mine. I don't know if that got me the job, but I wasn't above using anything I could possibly use.
It's great because this book came out basically right after season 1, because season 1 of the TV show is 2010. And so this book came out right around. And I'm obviously going to ask some questions that I may know the answer to, but I want some of the listeners to maybe hear out of your voice. They use some plot points and some things in the TV show that were canon out of the book too, but how much of your books ended up on the TV show?
Again, a great question. And I get asked that. And, you know, I would see permutations sometimes of, you know, original characters that came from the novels. I would see like, and that was another part of Kirkman's genius. When the show was in its heyday, he would take characters from other mediums and then change their destiny, change their arc in the show. So, you know, if a character survived in the novel, they might die in the show, or vice versa. If they died in the, they might. So, there were, there were several characters, and some of them ended up in video games, because right around that era, we were doing the Telltale games, and those were amazing, with Clementine, and that was kind of a separate group of characters and stuff, but they all started intermingling. But the bottom line, this is kind of a long, rambling answer to your question, but Kirkman loved to just keep the fans on the edge of their seats, where they wouldn't know who was going to, end up dead, who was going to, what was going to, what was going to happen with the character when they were moved from one medium to another. So yeah, he used characters from my book, but they were always like twisted around, and it was fascinating just to see his process.
Because if people ask, or if people were wondering, it's more that this novel series of 8 books is more canon with the comic books than it is with the TV show. Because, like you said,
yes,
they did adjust
I should
things
have
in the TV
mentioned
show.
that. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, I many times that's all I had to go on were panels that I was translating. And the governor was a perfect example of something that started in a comic book, and it was a certain way in a comic book, and then in prose, his character, morphed into something completely different, because I thought to myself, God, this guy looks like Danny Trejo on a bad morning. There he is. And I'm like, and also the first time Rick Grimes meets him, he's like, let me take you on a little tour. And I'm like, oh no, I wouldn't go on a tour with that guy. No way. But the guy in the novel became, this tortured, almost like multiple personality, and I won't give anything away. I still think it could be a spoiler for some people who haven't read it yet, but there's a twist ending where you find out who the guy really is. And David Morrissey kind of based his performance on that very thing. That was Morrissey's, touchstone, his North Star, was who this guy really was, and what that would mean to a performance. It was fascinating, man. I mean, and being in the middle of this amazing sort of mind meld, and hanging out with Morrissey and getting to know him and becoming a friend was so fascinating, because he would feed back to me his interpretation of the guy, and and it goes to the heart of what The Walking Dead is about, because he would go, this guy doesn't think he's evil. This guy doesn't think he's doing terrible, awful things, even though in the novel he it's just unspeakable horror. He weaponizes rape. I mean, it's really over the top evil. But Morrissey, the actor, had to find a human part of the guy and work with that. And that part he found was, the guy doesn't think he's being evil. He thinks he's just protecting his family.
Yeah,
he's protecting his loved ones. He's keeping the town safe. So it was like a mythic kind of story, how those 4 books helped create the on-screen character of the governor.
And this is, to me, it's funny, it's one of the most fascinating villains in The Walking Dead is the governor. And a lot of people would pick, I mean, Negan's unbelievably well written as well. I think that Kirkman killed it on Negan, but the governor's up there. It's like 1A, 1B in my opinion. And to have this extra storyline that goes along with it, it's like everybody loves the Star Wars. Not everybody, any Star Wars fan out there can really appreciate the novels and the comic books and the video games and everything that goes along with it. It's just like, I was so happy when I stumbled upon, like I mentioned before we started recording, I stumbled upon the first book I ever stumbled upon from you. It was Descent, or was it Descent? Yeah. Descent at a yard sale. And I saw the book and I was like, Walking Dead. And that's not an uncommon title. I feel like there's been movies called that and things called that. Right. It's not like this unique title, but I saw it and I was like, this, and I saw Robert Kirkman's name on there. I'm like, wait, hold on a second. And it made me go, oh my gosh, there's so much more to this universe that could be told. And we're getting that kind of nowadays with the TV shows. You're getting the spinoffs of, the Daryl show and all that stuff. But let's be honest, the best TV show that we probably, as big Walking Dead fans, to watch would be these 8 novels in a
Right.
TV show. And so, like, to me,
Yeah.
I'm like, just like taking this story of Lily Call and all this other stuff, and they did, like I said, they had some of this woven in there, which it has to because it runs parallel to the comic book. There are some things that are woven in, but what you don't see after the main characters, your Ricks and those people go away, is really, it would be awesome to see it. I mean, it's not too late, right? We can do it now. Let's do it.
Right. Yeah. Cool. From your mouth to God's ear.
Let's do it. No, but like it made me think that like I
You
love
you
the idea.
start you started on a really perfect book though on
Yeah.
one level, because Descent is the origin story for Lily,
Mhm.
and Woodbury version 2.0, you know, the next chapter of the Woodbury saga. Those 4 books take you through that, you know, and some of the characters, you know, ended up in, like I said, in video, you know, in video games and, you know, other mediums and stuff. Um, but that was another thing about Kirkman's universe and world building. You know, he always saw that, you know, I remember one time I had a chance to talk to Elmore Leonard, who's a great novelist, and I just, somebody asked him, "Are you going to do a sequel to, you know, Get Shorty?"
Mhm.
And he said something that kind of has haunted, or, you know, it's stuck with me over the years. He goes, "Yeah, you know, I've always wondered what he's doing out there. I know he's out there, and, you know, I've always wondered what he's up to." So yeah, I got one in mind. I'm thinking, you know, and that was Kirkman. Like, all these characters lived off screen,
Mhm.
off panel. You know, Michonne was gone from the comic book for, you know, months and
Mhm.
stuff. And then, you know, it turns out she was at sea. She was out on a, you know, ship. And just that's how his brain worked. And it was fascinating, you know. He one time I was working at his place, and he comes in, he sees me, he goes, "Bonansinga, I got a meeting right now, but I'd like to meet with you later this afternoon. Can you meet with me?" I'm like, "Of course." And he goes, "Good. I'm going to give you what you want." He walks out. Then he walks out, and I'm like, for hours, I
Like, what is he talking about?
ruminating, and what could it be? A raise?
Yes, exactly.
Money?
Some of that Kirkman money. Come on.
But it turned out, you know, he knew that my favorite character was Michonne. You
Yeah.
know, I always talked about her, and she's in the early books, kind of in cameo,
Mhm.
you know, small, you know, appearances and stuff in the early books. But yeah, he goes, "Yeah, I want you to work on a, you know, be a consultant on a Telltale game, that's going to revolve around Michonne." And I was like, "This can't be happening to me." It's just like, you know.
Pinch me. But I was thinking about it when you're talking about. So you have Clementine that was created in the video game as well, and then now Tilly Walden gets an opportunity to illustrate and draw and write about this character. You have Robert Kirkman obviously writing all 193 issues of The Walking Dead, and then you have other people who have worked on video games and things like that. But like, and then it's you, like there's like a handful of people who have had the opportunity to, I would say, write in written word these characters. It just must feel like you're literally going to go down with this one of those greatest horror comic or horror franchises. And it's like, you got Robert Kirkman, you got Jay Bonansinga, and you got Tilly Walden now having the opportunity to write these things. And there's obviously, like I said, other people that are involved. Forget the TV show part. Just this side of things. It's
Right.
like you're in a handful of people who have the opportunity to write these characters.
Right. That's you nailed it. You hit it. You hit the, you know, nail on the head. I mean, like, a lot of fans would come up to me at Walker Stalkers
Yeah.
and Comic Cons and stuff, and they'd go, my children and I would just want to thank you coming up with this whole world and everything." And for a long time, I would go, "Oh, well, excuse me, yeah, I didn't come up with the
Yeah.
world. You know, I'm just a humble writer. It got lucky, you know." But after a while, you know, they just kept saying it, and like, I just finally, I was like,
Yeah.
"It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
That's what I do."
That's what I do.
I
It's
hope Robert Kirkman's not listening to this because
well, I hope so, but no, yeah.
no, I'm
This
just
reminds me,
kidding.
my favorite, my wife and I
Robert,
have
you know
this.
I kid.
My wife and I, one of our favorite movies is sadly is the National Treasure franchise. Like, I don't know, what's something we bonded over when we first started dating.
Right. Yeah.
And there's at the end of, is it the end of, or the beginning of episode, or movie two, Riley Poole, one of the characters, is sitting at a table signing at like a Barnes and Noble, signing books for his book he wrote about different, like, conspiracy theories and things like that. And someone walks up and pretends like he's Nicolas Cage's character, and he's like, no, I'm not that person. I'm the other person who helped him. And the person walks away. The next person comes up as a very attractive female, and they go, "Aren't you so and so?" He's like, "Yes, that's me." Yes, it is. Oh, because your car's getting towed. It's like, oh shit, you gotta go get the car. But like the funny thing was, like, at some point you just have to say, it's like I used to manage my brother's band and like sell merch at their table at concerts, and they'd be like, "Oh, you did a great job on stage," and I'd say, "No, that wasn't me. That was my brother. We have a similar look, but we're not, And then finally, I was just like, "Yep, cool, sounds good."
Yeah. That's natural evolution of mistaken identity.
And someone's got a signed CD out there or a T-shirt with my autograph on it, and it has nothing to do with me because I wasn't performing. And they just like, "Can I have your autograph?" I'm like, "Sure, sounds good."
I mean, that's the thing about The Walking Dead. I kept, wanting to come up with an analogous franchise in past years, but even Star Wars wasn't really as pervasive as The Walking Dead in terms of just multiple mediums all at the same time. Talk about everything at once, all at the same time.
Yeah.
That was The Walking Dead, for several years. I mean, the run, and it's still, thriving out there without the prince, the original comic book series being put to bed.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So when they re-released The Walking Dead Deluxe, this is issue 27. There's 6 issues that came out because they have different covers. Like, obviously this is like the cover 1 or the original cover, different color. They have guest artists on here and so on and so forth. And then for local comic shop day, they did this cool like metallic one and things like that. So there's 7 copies. I'm such a huge Walking Dead fan. I own most of the Walking Dead original comic books. I'm still obviously piecemealing other ones through.
Right.
And I still went out, and I own number 27. It's right behind me. And I still went out to my local comic shop and bought the 7 copies of this book because I'm such a big fan. So Robert Kirkman knows what he's doing. He's printing money, and he's using me as a fan to make some money because these were $4 a piece. I'm just like, wait, I already own the other one. Why do I need these ones? And why do I need all these covers? So it's still going. It's still thriving in that sense. But yes, I was thinking about that when if you think about it. So you're releasing a book in 2011. The TV show's on the air. You're releasing this book with Robert Kirkman. The comic book's still going. Telltale Games are, there's when people release a Star Wars book now. I had Kevin Scott on recently, and he's writing the High Republic books for Star Wars and Lucasfilm, and he's also writing comic books based on them and things like that. But like, he's writing characters that were created in the 70s, 80s.
Right.
And he's writing these new stories based on that thing. You were writing like along the time when all this was like happening.
Yeah.
Like
that's really, that nobody's ever made that comment before, and that's really astute. I mean, that's very true. There was a time when they had these Walker Stalker conventions in Atlanta, and of course, Atlanta and Georgia, the state of Georgia, is where the show was filmed, and I always thought of it as a Southern Gothic. I thought I always thought of the IP as a Southern Gothic horror story, horror survival. That's what Kirkman originally called it, is survival horror. But they would have these conventions in Atlanta, 20,000 people, 25, 30,000 people. In its heyday, it was unbelievable. I could not believe. I mean, and just, it was such a treat, like being, it was later in my career. I had already, written and published, 50 books and already had carved out a career for myself, but nothing like this. I mean, I went from, a pathetic little, writer with a tweed, sport coat and, elbow patches, to this like rock
Yeah.
star. It was unbelievable, it was fantastic. I mean, I was pinching myself the whole time, and um I mean, I owe it to Kirkman in a way, all to Kirkman. I mean, Robert Bloch the writer of Psycho, once dedicated one of his dedicated one of his novels at the beginning of it as, I'd like to dedicate 15% of this book to my agent. uh, so I have to, thank my agents for
Yeah.
hooking me up, but still, yeah, it was an amazing experience.
I love how you say that too, because
Especially, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
especially the books that every book that I wrote for Kirkman was an experience in itself.
Mhm.
But especially, when he handed me the keys to the kingdom and said, "You come up with the stories and everything," it was a dream. It was like living the dream, because we like my wife Jill and I would go to a like a superstore, like like a Swedish box store that shall remain nameless, but they have great meatballs. Okay.
And
Well,
hard to pronounce furniture.
right. But she would like be, "Hey, this would be a great place to hide out during the zombie apocalypse." And I'm like, multiple floors, bedrooms, you know,
Tons of frozen meatballs.
tons of frozen meatballs. Exactly. So it did end up in Search and Destroy,
Yes.
one of the books. So yeah, it was an amazing experience.
I just love how you say that the connection to Robert Kirkman owing him. I had Daniel Krauss on who wrote The Living Dead co-wrote it with Robert
Yeah.
or with George A. Romero, and it's
He's
same thing.
brilliant
It's
writer.
him. You have him thanking Romero, but also thanking Guillermo del Toro because of the connection to, he also wrote The Shape of Water and Troll
Shape of
Hunters.
Water. Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like this thing. And he goes, I already had a career. Like he had Rotters and a bunch of books come out. And he's like, I was doing fine. Same thing.
Right.
And then it was like, oh my gosh, now I'm in the limelight with The Shape of Water and The Living Dead and so on and so forth. And he's got a new book coming
Right.
out called Whalefall this summer. But yeah, it was just like the connection sometime with that. And you want to be your own person. You want to write your own books and make your own name for yourself. But you have that opportunity, and to be able to partner with someone like who's created a horror franchise like Kirkman is probably, like I said, I would think that you're still pinching yourself to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure well, I mean, who knows, but I'm almost positive that it got me the Stan Lee
Mhm.
job, you know. It was Stan when, like it was a strange, it was like sort of a strange inversion or a
Mhm.
doppelganger of my experience, with Kirkman and The Walking Dead. Because, I just got a chance to meet long distance with Stan Lee,
Mhm.
and he approved me as the writer for this dark kind of weird premise that he had in his drawer that he could never, he didn't want to start it as a comic book. He wanted to start it as in prose, in a novel. That was his dream. He always wanted to be a novelist,
Mhm.
um, but only a few months after we just met, long distance, he passed away.
Mhm.
And I thought that's probably the end of that, this project. But no, it was even more interesting to people. It was a legacy project then, and so it's been, completely different experience. But that's probably how I got approved for that. Is my experience with The Walking Dead. That's it's a door opener.
Well, just
It's
think about it
totally.
now. I mean, think about your name is now attached to like it's gonna be like on Wikipedia. There's always like for the bands, like a band's Wikipedia, or like it says like associated acts, and it says
Right,
like this band was associated with this band with this band. It's gonna
right,
be
right, right,
your Wikipedia that's gonna be associated with Robert Kirkman and Stan Lee, and
right.
like George Romero. Like there's gonna be some connections there, and you're like, wow, this guy must be pretty good at writing if these are the people he's connected to.
Yeah, I mean, I'm I'm not being like falsely modest, but
Yes.
like I'm no Hemingway, like I'm just a working, mid-list author. But for some reason though, when I first started working with Robert, I it, it's just, I don't know, maybe it's just, sometimes it's coincidental, sometimes it's fate, sometimes it's the universe, who knows. But like I almost had been working toward writing these books my whole career, because I knew instantly they should be written in present tense.
Mhm.
Because and I'm not a comic book aficionado. The comic books I grew up reading were, Tales from the Crypt.
Mhm.
They were, creepy comic books. They were horror comic books. That's what I really. And Frazetta, I loved Frank Frazetta, and
Mhm.
that's my background. Bernie Wrightson and everything. But those were touchstones for The Walking Dead.
Mhm.
That really, those people influenced The Walking Dead, especially the look of not only the comic, but then the show itself, really created three-dimensional Bernie Wrightson zombies, and so like I just hit the ground running. I just the first pages I sent were, present tense, in your face, the here and now, because I thought that's what a comic book is.
Yes.
It's closer to a movie, and so I figured, yeah, this is what the prose analog of that should be. And it just worked. And I got asked that sometimes, why are they in present tense?
Mhm.
And I'm like, because that's how a screenplay is written.
Exactly. Like and for anybody who's listening who hasn't read these books, is you don't really you reading the comic books or watching this TV show will give you a little bit better of the bigger world that the Walking Dead, or the bigger universe the Walking Dead is in. But that doesn't mean you can read Rise of the Governor all the way to the end. Search was a Return to Woodbury in its own context. You don't have to read a comic book. You don't have to read anything like that. You get enough information in these novels to make it a standalone. Is it add to the comic books? Yes. Can you read the comic books without the books? Yes. Can you read the books without the comic books? Absolutely. And that's the best thing I think about the whole eight book series, is that it can be its own standalone. Someone who doesn't like comic books doesn't have to read the comic books.
Well said. Well said.
I wanted to give a shout out to like I mentioned, I read Fred Berman, who
Yeah,
read your books on Audible and on audiobooks, which,
amazing job.
oh, it made you, again, another element of being immersive into the world of The Walking Dead is the voices and the different things that some people just read a book straight ahead, and some people like to do the different inflections in their tones and their voice and things like that. And Fred did a great job on
Yeah,
the audiobook as well.
Fred has won awards. I mean, I've told him, you nailed it. You captured the whole zeitgeist of it. You've captured the sound. And when I did readings, I'd read them like this, like Truman Capote. I read them because I explained, I used to call it my Ashley Wilkes voice, but for some reason I started reading them in public, and they were so gory. And the the spear gun penetrated the monster's skull, and brain matter flew out the other side. And I've the gorier it got, the more genteel and soft and sweet, like a poetic lyrical voice. It just seemed it's the contrast just seemed to work. Yeah. So every time I did a reading, I would be like, and I'm gonna do this in my Ashley Wilkes voice. I apologize. I'm not an actor, but it just seemed to jibe with it.
You just need to bring Fred along with you. Right. When you do a reading, be like, okay, I'm going to sit here. This is the book I wrote, but this guy's going to read it for you. Hold on 1 second.
That would be like heaven.
Charge tickets for that one. You get a ticketed event for that one. Before I want to move on, I want to get into the Stan Lee part of this thing too. But like, has there been? I mean, you obviously don't have to tell me if I should know, but like, has there been discussions of more Walking Dead novels in the future? Not just connected around Woodbury, but just in general.
I mean, always. Okay. There's always discussions of that kind of thing. I mean, they after I fulfilled my contract with them, they hired a Chinese American author to do the book set in China, to do the
Typhoon.
Right. And because, you have a copy of it?
Oh, I think so. Hold on.
Wow, you are a completist. You are, there you
See?
go.
And there's also one called, as a comic book called Alien that was
Right.
based off of Rick's brother
Yeah.
in Europe, I believe.
Yep. I mean that, and so I get that. I mean, and also I was ready to move on, just just for you know, uh, kind of prosaic
Mm-hmm.
reasons. I wanted to get into something else, and the Devil's Quintet is kind of, like I said, it's almost like an inversion of the Walking Dead experience and an inversion of the Walking Dead comic books.
So yeah.
There's a lot of similarities too. I mean, um, it's Stan Lee in a dark, kind of pensive mood. It's really interesting, and that's what Stan was. He was Jewish, but he was obsessed, kind of, I think obsessed is a fair word, with God and the universe. And that's where all of his storytelling genius came from, was
Mm-hmm.
his ruminations and uncertainty about the universe. And so the Devil's Quintet kind of touched on that. To me, it really was something people weren't used to.
And that's the Armageddon Code came out last February.
uh
Yes.
yeah.
2022.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you have another one coming out
I'm
called
sorry, 2021. It came
21.
out in the winter of 2021.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And the Shadow Society, which is the follow-up of that, comes out this year.
Yeah. Comes out in May.
And that's, it's better. So it says Stan Lee's the same thing with this one. This is the one that we talked about, the Typhoon, Walking Dead Typhoon by Wesley Chu. It says the Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead, and then yours obviously says the Robert Kirkman's Walking Dead on those books. And this one says Stan Lee's The Devil's Quintet. It's better than. I want to throw Frank Miller under the bus here for a second. I don't know if you've seen any of his comic books that have come out recently. It's Frank Miller presents Frank Miller's Avatar or whatever. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, that's a little much. Frank Miller presents, and you can take the title, or Frank Miller's whatever. So this is great. This would be Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead, Robert Kirkman's Typhoon, or something like that. The same thing. So Stan Lee's The Devil's Quintet. The Armageddon Code was book 1. Book 2 is Shadow Society. Is there more coming from this, or is this like?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of writing book 3.
Okay,
yeah,
that's awesome. It just, what's the elevator pitch of what the Devil's Quintet is?
Well, the original premise, as I said, was something that Stan wrote down, and it reminded me in an eerie, kind of strange way, of the 10 to 12 page treatments I would get from Robert for the Walking Dead books. It was about 10 pages about this group of Navy SEALs. They were badass. Oddly, they were kind of superheroes already. They were like common superheroes with just human superpowers of being warriors. They were different genders, different nationalities. It was like a group of 5, a rainbow coalition. Also reminded me of Romero's survivors at the end of his movies. It was always like a pregnant woman, an African-American man, a gay man.
Yeah.
That's kind of Stan Lee's 5 Navy SEALs, and they became like super undercover, intelligence operatives for the country. But what happens in the story is, the origin story is they get ambushed on a mission, and they get thrown in a torture chamber, at a warlord's compound in this mythical Eastern European country that Stan came up with. And they're about to be killed. They're about to be killed on camera, for propaganda. And it's really grim, really grim. And at the height of the horror of that, all the lights go out, and the smell of brimstone wafts, and the devil shows up. And the devil's like, listen, you guys, you're about to die. I'll make you a deal. I'll get you out of this. In fact, I'll give you powers beyond your imagination. And it's all for a simple freelance job once in a while from time to time. I will need you to hunt down a person who has breached a contract I have with them. These people have skipped on me. I just need you to hunt them down, kill them, and then I'll take it from there. I'll damn them to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's the origin of this 5 group of superheroes who, they decide, okay, fine, they argue with each other, but they decide, let's do it. Let's take the Faustian bargain. But then they decide we don't work for the devil. One of the characters, this is what sunk the hook into me of the premise. One of the characters goes, don't we already do this for the government? we hunt down bad people, kill them.
And didn't you already sell your soul to the government?
Right. And that's the first thing that occurred to me when I read the 10-page treatment. I'm like, this is genius, because this says a lot about the world we live in. SEAL Team 6, it really resonated, so yeah, it's an ongoing challenge to make, because Stan's devil was sort of kind of a devil in Daniel Webster. He was kind of a whimsical, devil. And I was like, that's the one thing I have to, kind of step in and, Kirkmanize this devil and make it realistic and scary. And so, but I'm a lapsed Catholic. It was the easiest part, is making the devil scary.
And so you have book 1 that came out last year, and book 2 comes out this year, and you're writing book 3. Is this a trilogy, or is it going to go on for as long as you want to? Or
it's going to be 4 books initially from Macmillan, from Tor. And great publishing house. They get it, totally get it. A shout out to the editor, Greg Cox, who he knows more about comics and the different mediums and how they feed off each other and everything. He's my guru in terms of Stan Lee. And because I would be like, well, I'm not a Stan Lee, expert. I'm not a Stan Lee, disciple, but I know a little bit about Stan Lee. I always thought that Stan Lee was the co-creator of the flawed superhero in my mind. That was my own.
Yeah.
And that's so. I'm working with Stan Lee's company, which is called POW Entertainment, and Stan Lee's former partner, Gil Champion. And I've confirmed over the years with them and with Gil, these 5 Navy SEALs, they're flawed. They have foibles. They're screwed up. And they have good hearts, but they're messed up. They have a past. They have, and isn't that Stan Lee's gestalt? Isn't that, and they're like, absolutely, man. Absolutely. That's Stan Lee's, the superhero with doubts.
And he had to make it 5 because 4 was the Fantastic Four. So he couldn't do
right.
We got to do it different than that. It can't be the Fantastic Four. It has to be the Fantastic 5
or
the
so
Devil's
true.
Quintet.
That's so true.
Slightly different. That's all.
Right.
But yeah, so it's so you got this connection to the Walking Dead universe now. You're working in the Stan Lee universe now. You've got many other books out there. The easiest thing to do is to go to Amazon. You type in one of the books' names, and you click on your name, and it gives you all the books that you've written or co-written on there, so you can purchase those. Obviously, we always recommend buying books at your local bookstore, but whenever you buy a book, it helps support the author and the creator. So it doesn't matter where you buy it.
I have I have a sort of a favorite bookstore in Chicago called Bookends and Beginnings. And I always try to steer people to Bookends and Beginnings. Look them up, because they really are an amazing store. And also they're leading a charge against Amazon to try to help indie bookstores, which I totally believe in. We have some great ones in Chicago. There's another one called the Bookseller that Cellar
Mhm.
that I love too. Not far from my home. I live on the north side of Chicago, and you know, so does Daniel Kraus. Daniel Kraus
Yes, he
lives,
does live in Chicago. Yes.
which is odd. I don't know what it is about Chicago and
Horror
zombies.
writers.
Yeah, horror.
Yeah. No, Dana's got a new book coming out too this summer called Whale Fall, which seems
I
very
saw that.
interesting.
Yeah,
And we're working on, something else I can't really mention. There's something else being worked on in the back end of things
cool,
with Daniel that's pretty exciting that hopefully
cool.
at some point we'll be able to talk about. But
He's a brilliant writer.
oh,
I mean, my hat is off to Daniel Krause. He's
one of
amazing.
these days we'll see a Chicago people book with like a zombie book that's
Yeah, yeah,
between
right. That's
co-written by Jay
There's
and
an
Dan. There
editor
you
out
go.
there listening in.
Get this
Great.
together.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but yeah, so
Anthology.
the local bookstores and the same thing with local comic book shops is this exact same thing. In most of these places, like I usually try to promote my local bookstore, the Briar Patch, and I usually before I talk to someone and before I release an episode, I reach out to the owner who's a regular on the podcast as well. Sadly, he recently had a stroke and he's recovering from that, and so I haven't been in communication that much with him, Jabron, that much. But usually I try to say, hey, I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to say it's available. Is it available on your website? Because he has a website that works with a bigger, like a warehouse of independent bookstores that you can order from him. He gets a portion of that proceeds, but some big warehouse ships it out to you, which is kind of cool. So like you're still buying local and independent, but you can also order it from a distance. And
Perfect.
so my guess is that the Walking Dead books, if they're in stock, and the Stan Lee books are available on this website,
Right,
briarpatch.com.
right,
So
right.
check that out too. But if you're also, I live in Maine and in the Bangor, Maine area. And if you're in Bangor, Maine area, check out Briar Patch because I'm sure you can get some of these books there as well. But in the end, wherever you buy it and wherever you read it, not that I want to support bigger things, is it supports and it helps further the cause of your writing books. So pick up the
Bangor,
books.
Maine.
Period.
I mean,
Yes,
that's horror city America.
Stephen King, home of Stephen
That's
King. Which
that's
is funny because
awesome.
I forget who I was talking to. I was talking to Mark Guggenheim, and he was like, "Oh, my ex girlfriend used to live in Bangor, Maine, or something like that." And I'm like, "Okay, that's first of all the weirdest connection to a guest I've had on the podcast." But he's written stuff. He wrote the N comic book, Stephen King's adaptation of N, and stuff like that too. So there's always these connections in that horror world
Yeah,
of Stephen King and Adam Caesar, who's a big who's a horror novelist right now too. Also had the love for like the fact that I was in Bangor. It's like, oh, Stephen King. I'm like, come on up, visit. We've got a convention in the Bangor area. Come up. You guys can set up tables at the convention. You can see Stephen King's house. You can see things from the movie It, where they're based in Derry, Maine.
right,
We'll
right,
do this.
right.
We'll do a time where all you guys can come up. We'll do an authors con. How about that?
Cool, cool.
But yeah,
I'm
so
gonna
there's 8 books. I can read them off. There's Rise of the Governor, The Road to Woodbury, Fall of the Governor, Part 1, and then Part 2,
mhm.
Descent, Invasion, Search and Destroy, and Return to Woodbury. Those are the 8 Walking Dead books that
You get
you
an
have,
A plus. You just
and that's
passed.
in that order. And also,
Yeah,
this
correct
episode
order.
will drop on March 27th, so a week from the day we're recording it. As well, in between then, I believe the Friday before this is going to be a post just of a what order to read them in, because sometimes it can be
Perfect.
difficult for some people know that, and so that will be
Yeah.
on the website as well.
But
And
as
then
you mentioned before, they all are standalone
yes,
books. Even the first four.
yeah,
I mean, because so the like I said, the Rise of the Governor is sort of uh the origin story.
yes,
It's and it goes back to the outbreak, the early
hmm
days of the plague and everything. But then the next book, The Road to Woodbury, is the origin story of Lily Call,
hmm
who I'm again, you're so erudite with Walking Dead lore. I'm not telling you anything you
right,
don't know, but there was this couple of pages. I mean,
yeah,
literally, it was maybe 8 panels or
yeah,
whatever at the height of the battle between the forces of the governor and the
hmm
forces of Rick
yeah,
Grimes. And spoiler alert, but this is for by now this is like
long enough ago. Yes.
yeah, ancient history. But there was this woman who just popped up,
Yep.
and she's firing and shooting, and she's working for, she's one of the governor's thugs, and I won't give away everything that happens, but she does something, and she's ashamed and guilty, and she turns to the governor and goes, "Look what you just made me do."
Yeah.
And then she just aims her rifle at the governor, and people are like, "Lily," that's the first time her name. "Lily, don't. No, Lily, don't do it." And she's gonna kill the governor and everything. I'll leave it at that. But she was in, like, at the end of that scene, maybe 8-10 panels, she goes, "Everybody come with me if you want to survive." And she just leads them off. And that's the last mention of Lily. She doesn't even have a last name. That's the last mention of Lily in the comic book. And, it was Kirkman's idea. He's like, take her and, give her a life and give her, a story cycle and everything. And it was just, like I said, it was a dream project for an author, because you just took those panels and studied them, and I just stared at them and stared at her, and I started giving her a backstory and everything. So that's the second book, Road to Woodbury. You see her backstory, and it's a fascinating backstory. All these characters, when I first learned how to write when I was a kid, one of the first things I learned, I wish I could remember the teacher that said it, but it was, like in middle school, one of my teachers said, the key to storytelling is to have a character change. Like that just stuck with me my whole life. Like, and that's where a character arc comes in, and Kirkman was a genius at that. His characters all had these dramatic arcs where they began Lily Call is just like helpless.
Yes.
She's a little helpless sparrow at the beginning of Road to Woodbury, and she evolves into a badass warrior, and so that it was an amazing experiment in medium translation and just starting from scratch in a world that someone else built, and that's the most exciting thing I've ever encountered in my career, is that taking Lily Call. I gave her the name Call because Caul is an old archaic word for the placenta that surrounds an embryo. And I thought, she's being born. She's being born. Names have always been really important to me. So I had to give these people names, because in comic books, oftentimes they just have first names, like they do in movies. Movies, they oftentimes just have first names. But in novels, a novel is a deeper dive into just, the pedigree of a person, the background, the internal life of a person. So yeah.
And you visually can see, if you don't know you can actually see this is who it is. A first name is all you need, but really when you're looking at a comic book, you're seeing this one person, and I can understand who that is throughout the next panels. Where a book, you kind of need more background on that. And creating, that's my biggest thing about these parallel stories, I should say, same universe thing, is that there is characters that we fall in love with or wonder who this person is or where they went, and maybe you didn't even realize you didn't know where they went. Like maybe you read the books and then you go back and read the comic books again, you're like, wait, this is this panel where she just walks away and we don't really hear from Lily again. And that mentioning of you writing these books at the same time the comic book was coming out, you obviously had places you could go and people you could talk about and not talk about because you didn't want to ruin the rest of the comic book. But Kirkman knew, okay, Lily is done. You can touch Lily, you can have Lily do all the stuff with Lily, because I'm not going to do anything else with her. And that's the cool thing about that, and having a character you can pops into the universe and then pops right out of it, and then you can just go with it. It's like a little thread that connects them. But like I said, that makes it perfect also, because people can read the books and not need to worry about the comic books, or the opposite. Because I mean, right now as it sits, the comic books are a little bit easier accessible because you can get the deluxe version and still read them, or the trade paperbacks or things like that. But you're not going to go out and just pick up Walking Dead number 27, the first appearance of the governor, on the shelf somewhere. You're gonna have to pay a pretty penny for that, because that's a first appearance. It's like a key comic book and things like that. So
right.
But yeah, so like even if you like separate it into, part one is Rise of the Governor, Road to Woodbury, Fall, and 1 and 2. And then you have part 2 would be Descent, Invasion, Search and Destroy, and Return to Woodbury. And so even if you wanted to read one part and not the other part, or so on and so forth, I recommend reading them all. They're easy reads. They're great. If you're a big Walking Dead fan, this is just another part you can get in there. If you've read all the issues and you want some more, I've now read The Walking Dead way more than I probably would be willing to admit. And I was mentioning before we recorded that I need to go back and listen to all these again because I listened to them in an audiobook. I actually haven't even started reading there's a Walking Dead Typhoon from Daniel from Wesley Chu. I should read that. I have read Alien. That was a great book. There's this one, like, I have a hardcover of it, I think, a hard trade of it that I read that is pretty cool. It's like that overseas thing, and I think that's what they're kind of doing with Daryl's character in this TV show. They're kind of like bringing him over to Europe, I believe, and doing something with him, like a 6-episode thing. But I think like I said, I think most Walking Dead fans would love to just see a 6-episode mini series of one of these books. You know what I mean? Like, I just think that there are people, fans of that, would like it. You don't have to do like a 11 season thing. Just do a one mini series now. They're doing these mini series, and one of them would be great to go back and bring back some of the people that potentially play these characters or versions of these characters and do a story off to the side with these. I think I would. And
you remind me of my wife.
Well, I'm also trying to make you some money here, Jay. Okay.
Thank you. My wife Jill is the only person I've heard that sells that well. You know. Yeah. I have two boys, and college age boys. So buy early and buy often.
I was just thinking to myself, I'm like, we're in a world that we're watching The Mandalorian, and we're watching Book of Boba Fett, and these Ahsoka TV shows that are based on characters that were spots in the Star Wars universe that happened years ago in our lifetimes. And doesn't mean that The Walking Dead can't be like that. Not that people are going to be pissed off that I'm saying The Walking Dead is equal to Star Wars. Obviously, they're two different animals, people. Like, it's not the same, but The Walking Dead has such a great following that I do think that they would get a streaming service or AMC to do a 6 or 3, or even one of those anthology series that did like an episode on some story that came out of one of these 8 books, because I think people who are Walking Dead fans would love it. I think that's my personal opinion, and I'm trying to make you some money. I'm trying to get me to have more things to watch on TV, even though there's not enough things to watch on TV.
We'll negotiate your percentage.
Yes, exactly. No, all I want is when this happens, I want you to come back on and talk about this and be like, see, we had this discussion.
Right.
No, but also Stan Lee's books are I haven't got a chance to read them. There's just so much, and this is nothing against you. There's just so much to read, but they're on my list to read the first one, and I want to read the second one when it comes out. And so get those two, Stan Lee's The Devil's Quintet. It's the Armageddon Code is the one that's available now. And then The Shadow Society comes out in May, on May 9th. I think it said. Yes, May 9th. Yeah. And you are on Instagram, the letter J, Bonansinga at that. And then it's confusing because you're on Twitter as the word J, the name J, Jay, Bonansinga. And then you're jbonansinga.com, right?
Thank you. Yes.
Do all that stuff. Buy all of his books. say nice things on the reviews.
Thank you, man.
All those things. Well, I tell people, I feel like a broken record when I tell people that are on the podcast. I'm like, because I run this thing myself, and I have another co-founder of the website and the podcast that occasionally comes on and helps in the back end and stuff like that. But we make our own decisions on who we have on here. Like we reach out. We don't have someone up above us. We don't have Spotify being like, you need this person and this person's promoting something. And so when I reach out to someone, I'm like, I'm going to reach out to you because I am a fan of the work you do or the stuff that you've done. And so never am I ever going to be like, so why did you do it this way? Because I enjoyed it. So when I start at the end of the podcast wrapping things up, be like, buy their stuff. I'm saying this because I'm actually saying that. I'm not saying this because I'm trying to make the guest happy. I do believe in the stuff that we promote on here. So
awesome, man.
Check all the stuff out that you're doing. You're doing a great job, and hopefully there's more for personal selfishness, there's more Walking Dead coming from your fingertips on the typewriter.
Thank you.
I hope you're using a computer, not a typewriter.
I would use a typewriter if I could get away with it.
I think you make some people mad around you if you hear clack, 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 clack. You should just bring it into a Starbucks and put a typewriter on a table and start. I'm writing a book. Don't worry. Clack, 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 clack. No.
I'm a boomer. I still have to read everything. All of my work I have to read on paper. I have to print it out and read it on paper just to understand whether it's working or not. That's my medium. I grew up, without the internet. I grew up without laptops. I grew up, everything was on paper, and that's my happy place.
See, I like the audiobooks, and I read my comic books mostly digitally. Well, there's two reasons to that. One is I get advanced copies that are PDF, so I have to read them digitally. Right. And the second reason is my wife goes to bed about 30 minutes, 45 minutes before I do, but I like to go into bed the same time. And so I have my iPad and it's backlit, so you can actually see in the dark. And so reading it digitally makes a lot more sense. I am also just a completionist and a collectionist and a hoarder, to the point where I need it also in physical print. So I usually own it like in audio format, digital format, and in print format. And she's like, you probably will never open that book. I'm like, yeah, but if someone ever wants to read it, I can let them borrow it, or I can give it to them, or whatever. She's like, you're crazy. But yeah, so check out Jay on social media. You can obviously just search on social media for Jay Bonansinga, and it will come up. Buy your books for sure. Anything else you have coming up in the future, near future, you wanted to tell people about, or is it just this new book coming out on May 9th?
Well, I mean, I'll just give a little shout out to a showrunner named Craig Titley, who is the showrunner of Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And he has fallen in love with the Devil's Quintet, as I have, and he and my agent and manager, Andy Cohen, are shepherding a series pitch now around taking it around and setting up. They believe they're going to set this up, a limited series based on the Devil's Quintet. And that's what I'm really excited about. I'm probably not even supposed to talk about it, but for you, it's a little, gesture of goodwill.
I forget who was it Mark? Who was I talking to recently? I was talking to, it comes out this week. Dan Panosian, who's a comic book writer and artist. And I was like, oh yeah, and your comic book Alice Ever After was renewed for a second volume. And he goes, it has? I go, why? He goes, oh, I didn't know if I was supposed to talk about that. I'm like, 2 weeks ago, your publisher posted something online, so I feel like we're okay to talk about that. Right, goes, oh, cool, yeah. So we're doing this second volume. I'm like, well, I felt like you do enough interviews that someone would have brought this up to you. And he's like, nope, no one did.
No,
I'm like, cool.
We're the last to learn about these things.
Well, I listened to a bunch of different podcasts that deal with current event things, and they're always like, I think I could talk about this, and then turn over to their computer and they're Googling it to see if it's up on the internet somewhere, and yep, someone else posted about that. So I have this coming out, and I'm like, oh, that's the world we live in. There's so much access to you that people want to know about things, and sometimes you don't know what you can and cannot actually say.
Right.
But I'd be like I said, I'm looking forward to anything related to Stan Lee's been a big. I mean, I have Stan Lee. It's hard to see people. I have Stan Lee tattooed on my arm.
So cool. That's awesome.
And so Stan Lee has been obviously a huge. I've been a Marvel comic book fan since I was young, and I was so bad at reading when I was young. So comic books were what got me into it, and his world creating and all that stuff. So Stan Lee's meant a lot to me too, and so books that he has come from the beginning stages have come from his wonderful mind is worth reading. So I'm looking forward to that, and so on and so forth on that too. So also watching TV's a big fan. I'm a big fan of watching TV. So a limited series would be huge. But I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with us and taking your morning to do this.
My pleasure.
Best of luck to anything else you got going on. Good luck the rest of your day and forever, all those good things. So
appreciate it, man. Thank you.